Hello, and welcome to another episode of Jaxon Talks Everybody. With me, your host, Jaxon Stone. And I'm pretty fired up for today's episode. I feel like I got a pretty like-minded guy that I'm about to talk with. We met, I don't even know, maybe a few years ago because of pro wrestling. But that'll probably be the smallest thing we talk about on today's episode will be pro wrestling. I'm sure we'll mention it and what's going on with the current climate. But my guest today is Mik Drake. He's a lawyer, pro wrestler, currently getting his master's degree at Columbia University. But my favorite part of his Twitter bio is that optimism is his jam. So I'm fired up to talk to him. What's up, dude? How are you?
I'm great, Jackson. It's so great to see you, and I see you sipping your coffee, man. That makes me so happy to see you still on the coffee bandwagon.
Yeah, dude. I just made a latte, so it's even more special today.
I love it. I love it. Absolutely love it. I'm great, man. Things are good. It's a weird time right now with COVID and quarantines and masks, but I'm looking at things, controlling what I can control, and things are good, man. Overall, things are good for me.
Good, good. Yeah, I mean, it is a very interesting time, but I think it's a super important time as well. A lot
Yeah,
of, so just a lot of things need to happen, and I think change is being made, which is cool. But I don't know, just give me your thoughts, like thoughts on the current situation and just overall in general, how you've been handling things. And
I think it's tough because I know for me, especially when this first started, I would always think like, okay, what has this done to my life and a lot of the things that I've worked towards over the last, 10, 15 years. So wrestling, for example, right? I've spent so much time and blood and sweat and money and so much of my life in wrestling. And now because of Corona, because of COVID, it's all kind of gone. And so I'm like, at least temporarily, right? Because we know that everything is temporary. That's one of the themes that I'm sure you've talked about on the show before is how everything is temporary. And so I was getting frustrated initially, like, oh man, like, what am I going to do? Like, and you just start spiraling, right? Because it's like, oh, my job scene is going downhill, my wrestling's going downhill, relationship's going downhill, like, damn, like everything starts spiraling. And I noticed that when I was able to kind of step back, take a second and be like, hold up, I can't judge myself for what I'm doing now based on the world that we were in before Corona, right?
mm,
I can only do that and I can only chase dreams, goals, objectives, whatever it is that I want within the confines of the current world that we're in right now. And know that, that old world will come back in some way, shape, or form eventually. So that was kind of a struggle that I initially kind of felt myself feeling was, hey, recognize that things are a little bit different right now. So you need to kind of change and adapt yourself to the way things are now and kind of redefine what you look at as success within the confines of where we are now. So that was something that I kind of struggled with initially when this whole thing started.
interesting. Was that solely based, like, was wrestling at the point where coronavirus hit for you? Was that something that was kind of taking off, or were you finally kind of getting recognized for some of your talents over such a long period of time, or was just like other life stuff just in general?
No, it's, you know what? The funny thing is, it was a combination of all of it. So on the wrestling side, I think you've known I've been kind of around the indies for pretty long time now. But really, it was in the last 2 years that I kind of started getting that. You kind of hit your stride where it's like, hey, Nick's in Portland, he's in Chicago, he's in Florida, he's in New York, right? And last year, I was actually recruited by an EVP at WWE with someone who I was tag teaming with at the time, Devin Driscoll, to kind of come down to the PC, do some talent evals, do some consulting, kind of get a sense of what they're doing, and kind of help with the eventual. And this is not proprietary. This is public. They've talked about this. The goal was always to expand NXT global. And the locations are TBD, were TBD, but that was kind of something that I was going to hopefully be a part of. And of course, with this, that gets all kind of put on pause. And there are other factors at play in terms of TV rights deals and things that kind of had slowed the train on that a little before that. And then I was recruited also by the NWA to kind of work on their office side stuff, but also ringside stuff. And that was really exciting because that's kind of like a startup, right? It's not an established property in the same way that a WWE or an AEW is. It's a company that's creating content. It's very unique, and it's content that eventually could be sold to a TV rights platform or an OTT, like a streaming service. So that was really exciting. But again, because of Corona, that kind of got all placed on hold. So I was like, okay, these things are on hold now. And then, you mentioned in another part of my life, I'm an attorney, and when courts close, cases slow down, um, so we had to kind of deal with some cases disappearing, some finances changing. So my job was kind of redefined a little bit. I'm very, very blessed, very lucky. I recognize that in a lot of ways that a lot of people are not, and a lot of people are struggling right now. But I took a little bit of a hit, so that certainly hurt a little. And then me, that I'm a really social guy. I like to be out there and be around friends and go on dates and hit up shows and theater and museums and events and talks and that kind of stuff. And all that's really gone, right? Especially living in New York City, so much of that is so important to the experience of being in Manhattan, and all that stuff is kind of gone. So it was kind of like not just a 1-2 punch, it was like a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 punch. And then gyms are closed, and I love working out. I love throwing my medicine balls and doing crazy jumps and
breaking
broad
glass
jumps.
and breaking glass in your gym.
Yeah, that day it's a miracle. I threw a med ball one day, and a band broke that was attached to me, and it snapped back and shattered a window on the second floor in NoHo, which is a pretty nice neighborhood in Manhattan. So it's a miracle they never kicked me out of the gym.
They still let you work out there?
They still let me work out there. I actually told them what they should have done is put that on their social media, and that would have blown up for them a little bit and been like,
Yeah.
hey, we're a hardcore gym. Look at us.
Yeah, you could smash windows and stay.
Exactly. But like the gym was kind of my refuge too. And that was gone. Now I was super lucky in the sense that I saw this coming and I bought a little bit of equipment. I was lucky enough to get my hands on it and be able to afford it. But all of a sudden, all of the things that you love and have worked for and are looking at, engaging with on a regular basis are gone. And you have to kind of, I don't want to say find yourself, because if you don't know who you are, that struggle is going to be like really, really much more difficult than it is. I'm very lucky in that I'm very comfortable with who I am and know who I am. So I don't look at myself as defined by all these things, even though I like to do them. And I think that's something that people need to keep in mind during this time.
Yeah, so there's a kind of a theme that I talk about a lot on this podcast. Because always when someone was struggling, whether it's something they're struggling with in their daily life or just like inside their head or just things, right? We always want to compare ourselves to other people, right? And I tweeted this the other day, like comparison is the thief of joy, right? Because we're comparing everything what we have to other people, and so it's in this coronavirus situation, it's very hard to think about ourselves and say, okay, I'm actually, a lot of stuff has been taken away from me. I'm not doing well. But then we think about everyone else who may be doing worse, and then we forget that our own feelings are real and that we can't really have the capacity or space for other people unless we really focus and internalize what we're going through. And so, I mean, you can definitely hear in your voice, right? You're saying like how grateful you are still and how lucky you are, but you're also understanding the things that you've lost. So you're able to still kind of move forward with that, with the kind of different changes that the world has presented you. So I think that's interesting, and it's also really good on you.
I think you have to do that, right? Like, I think it's unhealthy for you to just, people will say gratitude is super important, and I agree with that. But if you channel gratitude and then do not confront the feelings you have of, fear or inadequacy or imposter syndrome or anything like that, you're kind of just putting that on the back burner, right? Like, you can do both. You can be grateful for where you are and what you have and where you think you're going, and also acknowledge at the same time that, hey, this is where I'm struggling. This is where I want to improve. this is where I need to make some time for myself and kind of process things. I think that's actually the best way to do it.
Absolutely.
And it's hard too, right? Like it's work to do that. It's much easier to just kind of like, put it out of your mind and be like, well, it is what it is. Well, yeah, but how do you feel about it? Right? Like that's healthy and normal. And I think a lot of guys too, I don't want to generalize, but men especially kind of get into this mindset where they think that this kind of thing is feminine or it's not like what a real man does. But that's just what a human being does, right? Like it's
Yeah.
normal. You should have these emotions and feelings.
Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty heavy in the mental health space these days, which has been pretty incredible journey for me so far. But the idea of the toxic masculinity is a very important one, right? Because you know, I mean, I wasn't taught that growing up, but a lot of people were taught that growing up, that you got to hide your feelings. You can't cry. You can't show anyone that you're weak. There's no reason to ask for help. If you got to take care of your family, it's got to be all on you. And all these things are just like, I mean, they're just basically point and blank. They're wrong. Like, this is not how it should be. Like a real, I want to say, I'm going to use quotation marks, man, because there's a large definition and many different variations of what that could be and what that could entail about someone who takes care of their family or goes to work every day, or just, random everyday things that make you a fucking human being. And, if you're really struggling and you need help, asking for help is a bigger sign of strength than you just like trying to carry all this weight by yourself. And I think that's a huge important factor for us, because especially in the kind of profession we're in as pro wrestlers, like everyone wants to come off as like this macho, tough guy, super badass. And I'm just like, I'm really competitive and I know I'm a good athlete, but I'm also very into my feelings and emotions. And if I'm having a bad day or a rough day, you can tell, and that's okay for me, because I feel like it's okay to have a bad day and to struggle. And a lot of men, I think, need to understand that. And so, I mean, just us having the conversation about it, if any other guys are listening, they're going to feel more open about having a bad day or struggling or telling someone how they feel, because they're seeing two guys who work out, lift weights, do a macho profession, again, quotes, and they're going to feel more comfortable with that. So I think already opening up the conversation is the most important thing. But yeah.
And I don't think I think you're right. Those things are not mutually exclusive, right? Like being a confident, strong, quote unquote man and having feelings or asking for help or dealing with emotions or processing, a lost friendship or a breakup or anything like that. Those are not mutually exclusive. Like you can and should be willing to do both. And I think too many times people, even now, we see it in some places with the mask stuff, right? Where people are saying, there's a global pandemic and people are going, oh, well, don't wear a mask. Like real men don't need to wear a mask because it makes you look like a girl, and that's a whole nother can of worms. Like, the look like a girl as if being a girl is something detrimental or there's something negative associated with it, when that's not true. But this whole mindset of, hey, you shouldn't wear a mask because a real man doesn't wear a mask because he's tough and he doesn't care and he doesn't, give a flying whatever. I look at that and I think, man, you know what a real man does? A real man has empathy for other people and compassion. Like those are signs of strength, right? Of saying, you know what, I care about other people. So even though wearing this makes me a little uncomfortable, I'm going to do it because it's going to make the lives of other people around me better. I think personally, to me, that's more a sign of strength than being able to bench 225 35 times, which I can also do. I had to throw that in there. I'm sorry.
No,
you weren't going to be able to talk 100%. To me for an hour without me putting myself over. You know that.
No, I would love for you to talk about yourself, please. I think very highly of you, and I think you think very highly of you as well.
Well, I do, and I think there's we're half joking, but also there is a line between confidence and arrogance, right? And healthy confidence and unhealthy confidence.
Oh yeah, I have this written down in my notes. So we're gonna get into this for sure.
Oh well, then I'll pause it for now. Anyway.
Yeah, save it. We're on the same vibe though. That's good. We're on the same wave. But yeah, I mean, we exchanged some tweets back and forth about empathy. I tweeted something about like empathy is finally becoming something that's like a really sexy, attractive trait. And you said it's always has been, and it's true. It always has been, but now it's becoming. People are talking about it more, and it's becoming more of a thing that more people strive to have and should have.
Well,
Because
you're
just
saying socially and culturally it's becoming more accepted, which I agree with.
right,
Right? That's what I should have said. To me, it's always been that way. But culturally and socially, especially here in the U.S., we kind of look at it as that's not really manly, right? A man just goes to work and you bottles up his feelings, kind of pushes that down, and doesn't put that out. And I think you're right. I think culturally and socially, it's slowly starting to become more and more acceptable, and people are seeing that if men don't confront these feelings and aren't open and honest with this, it actually ends up harming them and their partners and kids and families and neighborhoods in the long run.
yes, yeah. I mean, definitely. Like you hit it right on the nail. Like if we're not handling our own emotions and feelings, then it's either going to portray outward on the people that we love the most, and we're going to hurt the people we love the most, whether it be our spouse, our kids, or sadly, we're going to end up, ending our own lives, which a lot of men are doing way too often. Um, and so if we can open up the conversation there, then it's going to save lives. Like that's not a false statement. That's not like saying this broad thing. That's like a real this having a conversation with your male friend about how they feel, really how they feel, can save their life. So if we can be the reason for that, I think that's incredible and very impactful. So
And you probably noticed this too. I noticed in the last couple of years as I've become more aware of this. If I just send a text to a guy friend who I'm not generally very open with in terms of having those kinds of conversations, or has been in the past. And I just say, hey man, like, how are you feeling about this? Or how are you feeling today? Or how are you feeling X? People, people want to open up, right? Like they want to open up. They want to be honest. They want to kind of let this out. And it's really shameful, I think, that we've kind of culturally for so long made that a thing where, hey, you need to feel shame for feeling emotions and for having these feelings. And I think it's great that now that's changing.
yeah, slowly but surely it's changing for sure. Shame is such a powerful tool, right? But it's the wrong way to go about bringing change, right? You can easily shame someone or make fun of them. It's like the mask situation. Like I can shame you and make fun of you for not wearing a mask, but it's not going to make you want to put on a mask. But if I tell you really and hold you accountable as to why you should be wearing a mask, it might lead to real change. But that accountability factor is a lot harder than just saying, "Hey, dude, fuck you, you're not wearing a mask." Like that's not going to make him want to put on a mask, though. But if maybe I have a conversation with him and try to hold him accountable, then he might go home. Maybe he looks at his kids or his friends and he's like, "Oh, okay, maybe I want to keep them safe. I care about them. I care about other people. Let's wear a mask for 20 minutes while I'm in Walmart."
That's you hit one of the concepts and themes that I feel very, very strongly about when you mention accountability. Bren Brown, she's a professor, she's a speaker. She's written books. She's written one of my favorite books. It's called Dare to Lead, and
She's
she says
amazing.
that she's amazing. She's amazing, and she says that leadership is accountability. And in her book, she's talking about it with respect to being in the workplace, right? Whereas you're in the office, and if you really want to improve performance for people, and you want to show them that they can be better and do better, you have to make sure that you're holding yourself accountable for successes, failures, things that need to be improved on, etc. But that's really something that you should be doing in life too, right? So leadership and life is accountability, whether that's your professional goals. Like if we want to be wrestlers and you want to be big, strong, and jacked, well, you need to hold yourself accountable by going to the gym and eating right.
Hmm.
If you want to date someone and have a healthy relationship and you're not communicating things clearly and things start to fray, well, you need to hold yourself accountable for that and fix it or learn. So I think accountability is really, really important with where we're at today.
It's huge. And I mean, I think it's a good segue to speak on accountability because in indie wrestling, we just had the whole currently still, I don't know, whatever, but the speaking out movement, right? And the only way to create real positive change from all these stories that were told, which first off takes a lot of courage and vulnerability, which is another thing Brene Brown talks about, vulnerability, which is a beautiful thing. To talk about was probably one of your most painful experiences in your life. So I thank all those people for doing that. But the only really reason to thank those people for sharing their stories is to hold now every single wrestler and promotion and company accountable for actually making safer, healthier, happier environments for wrestlers and fans alike.
Yeah, and I think that to me that means more than putting out the right PR statement. I need to see action from you. And it's interesting that this happened at the same time that a lot of the uh, police brutality, Black Lives Movement kind of protests and concerns went more mainstream. I don't want to say they weren't before, but just in terms of visibility and more people being on the side of saying that we need to embrace racial justice in this country, that number definitely went up recently. And a lot you saw a lot of, and this is me, my Columbia grad school kind of branding brain going off. You saw a lot of these companies put out statements saying we stand with Black Lives Matter, we stand on the side of racial justice and improving policing, community policing, et cetera. And for the first time, you kind of saw this pushback from people where they would say, hey, you put out a PR statement, that's great, but what are you actually doing? What substantive actions are you taking to show us that you support this? Because if you don't, then we're not going to support you with our wallets or our attention. And you saw this. There's a great contrast, and I did a little bit of a case study in this in one of my classes. Nike, if you remember, put out a fantastic statement and said, "Hey, this is our statement. This is what we believe in. Here's what we're doing. We're putting X amount of money towards this program, X amount of money towards that program, X amount of money towards this program over the next 10 years. We hope to improve community relations and whatnot." And their statement was very good. Whereas the NFL, Roger Goodell then put out a statement. I think it was one paragraph or two sentences just saying, we stand with Black Lives Matter and we support protest and peaceful protest, and that's it. And the NFL obviously has some baggage there because there's pre-existing factors in play there.
Right.
There is a very credible accusation to be made that the league froze out Colin Kaepernick, which we could spend an hour and a half on that. But people, the bottom line is they made that statement and people saw it as very tone deaf and very see-through, right? Because they said, okay, that's great, you're supporting it. What are you actually going to do?
Right.
So I think to bring it back to your point of speaking out in wrestling, every company kind of has to say, when they're confronted by these issues, or even if they're not, just by virtue of being in the industry, right? It's something that they need to address. They need to say, hey, listen, we hear you, we see your bravery, we see your concerns. This is what we are going to do moving forward. And some companies have been very good at that. Some have not, and some have kind of been in the middle ground. We have to kind of see. I do wonder how this would have played out if we were in a world where shows were going on a regular basis, as opposed to basically wrestling being on pause outside of the major national companies that still have television deals.
Yeah, because it would have been very hard to enact real adequate change if a wrestling company was doing, if we were going every weekend like we normally would be, so I think obviously I think change comes out of great adversity, and obviously we're in great adversity right now, kind of collective trauma, collective adversity, and so that's when change usually happens. And I still think it's not really a coincidence that a lot of these movements are happening during a time of COVID-19, because people have time to think and process, and they want to see change, and they want to be change, and they want to be about something important in history. And so I think, yeah, it's actually the perfect time for something like this to happen in indie wrestling, because then when we do come back full throttle, the shows are actually safe. They're actually good. People are taking care of one another. When we see something shit, we can actually talk about it and not just be like, I'm going to get heat, or I don't want to lose a booking. That's so dumb. That stuff like that never was like something that I thought about, because like, I don't know, I just came from a different background, and like, if I saw something that I thought was wrong or not good, I was going to say something about it, and I wasn't afraid about losing an indie wrestling booking, because, to be honest, it ain't that deep. And so, uh,
You're right. I do think that I think you're right that if we were in a time where people were running shows week to week, I think this would have lost some of the um, impact that it did have, just by virtue of it being a part of the churn of the day, right? Which is not to say that it's insignificant in any way, shape, or form, but just in terms of people's attention spans would have been short, which is horrible, because your attention span should reflect the intensity, severity, and merits of what somebody's putting out there, especially when it's
yep,
something as traumatic and difficult as some of the things people put out in speaking out. But I think that because we have this break and people have done this work on themselves and courageously put these things out there, it has given us an opportunity to kind of reevaluate, hey, is this okay? Is this not okay? And frankly, I hope that it makes independent wrestling a better place for everyone. I know that, the thing about the bigger companies, especially, if one is publicly traded or one has a national TV rights deal, is there are corporate concerns there too, where even if there is no morality, right? And I'm not saying there isn't, right? There are a lot of good people that work for a lot of these big companies who care about these issues and want to make sure that they have safe, inclusive, and healthy environments for their talent and fans. But even if they weren't there, just purely from a financial standpoint, it is not good for business to have these kinds of things happening in your industry, right? It's not something that is good for advertising. It's not something that's good for TV rights fees. So, on the larger scale, I'm optimistic that that combined with the existing morality of people who are there will be able to make some lasting change. Um, on the smaller scale, on the indie scale, I am a little bit worried that things are going to go back to normal sooner rather than later, but I hope I'm wrong. I have seen encouraging signs, and that does give me hope. I'm an optimist. And there are some promoters who I respect a great deal who have put their foot down and said, hey, listen, if I hear about this kind of thing happening, that's it. You're done. Full stop. And that makes me optimistic for the future, because by and large, those promoters are the ones who have independent brands worth recognizing.
right.
I'll just to name drop a few. I know that over at Freelance Wrestling, they care about their talent. They care about their fans. They are very, very passionate about making sure it's a safe, inclusive, and respectful environment for all involved. I know that in Florida, Ronin is the same way. So there are people who have name value in independent wrestling who I'm confident are going to do the best they can to make sure that this movement is not lost to time.
Yeah. Yeah. And in Texas, basically, I mean, I don't want to say that I'm leading the charge, but I'm leading the charge in terms of making sure these companies and these shows, I can't do everything, right? But I can at least speak on what I see and speak on what I hear, and make sure that we're actually trying to make real adequate change. And if these changes don't happen overnight, right? These companies aren't made of money, so they can't just like all of a sudden like have this new whole deal or whatever. But they can remove the people from the locker room and not associate with people who have been called out. That's one step that has to be made. No issue, no ifs, ands, or buts about that. And just being more, open and understanding, and all these things. So in Texas, I think we're doing an okay job right now. We're moving in the right direction. But I'm going to do my part on that regard. But again, we'll see.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. I know there's a number of good people out there in Texas doing the same thing and who would be on your bandwagon with you. So I'm hopeful and optimistic that's going to happen, and it's going to happen in pockets. It's going to happen slowly in independent wrestling. But the one benefit is that there is no John Cena or The Rock in independent wrestling. There's no one who is above um, their behavior being excused.
Right.
And that really shouldn't happen at even the highest levels. We know it does happen at the highest levels in all companies, no matter their industry, unfortunately, especially in the entertainment industry. But the benefit to independent wrestling is there is no one that's at that level. So everyone can and should be held accountable. And if that's happening from the bottom, hopefully that's something that eventually migrates to the top as those people move up through their careers.
Yeah. I 100% agree with you there for sure. Love it. Love to see it. All right. So I'm going to ask you a few questions about yourself.
Wow, I get to talk about myself. I don't know if I'm ready for this. Do you think I can handle talking about myself?
Yeah, don't let your head get too big for the room.
Okay. All right, shoot, let's go.
So I mean, personally, I think that you're a hardworking guy. Is this something that you've always had, or something that your parents instilled into you, or like you had a mentor, or like where did the work ethic come from? Where did it start?
So I grew up. I was very lucky growing up. I wouldn't consider myself rich, but I got new clothes every year for school. I always got to go to tennis practice, or if I wanted karate lessons, I got that, or play an instrument, or whatever. I was very lucky in that respect. Um, but I don't think I really had that work ethic. A lot of people look at me and they kind of ask me like, "Oh, your parents from India, they must have instilled this work ethic in you." I'm like, dude, I'm from New Jersey. Like it's not the same thing as being the immigrant who comes from somewhere, right? Like I'm the same as anybody else. Like I was, born and brought up in New Jersey. It kind of started, I want to say, when I was in high school, I was a pretty good basketball player. Um, and I got to college and I went to Rutgers for undergrad, and they had open tryouts for the basketball team. And Rutgers was D1, and they had tryouts for walk-ons, and there were maybe, 400 kids, 350 kids who tried out. And I made it through like 2, 3 days. And I was one of the last like 5 or 6 people who were cut from it. And I was really disappointed. It was kind of the first time in my life I felt a tinge of regret, because I was like, oh man, I took this more seriously in high school instead of goofing off. Like I could have played D1 basketball. I never would have made it to the NBA or anything. But, D1 is a pretty big deal.
Huge, yeah.
Huge. So I remember being pretty disappointed about that and thinking, man, like this feels terrible, like having these regrets. Like, I don't ever want to feel this way again. Like, what do I want to do with my life? And I started thinking about it, and I thought about wrestling, and I kind of wanted to get into wrestling, and I don't want to give you the full long story, but basically what I told myself when I started this wrestling school was I was like, listen, if you're gonna do this, you're gonna do this 500%, 1000%. There will be nothing left on the table. There will be no, I should have worked harder. I could have worked harder. If you don't make it, it won't be because you didn't work hard enough or do enough on your end, right? And you can only, in any endeavor, you can only do the 99%, right? 1% is timing and luck and fit and the universe, and you can call it divine or whatever you want to call it. But you can control that 99%. And so that's kind of where this mindset started for me. And I remember trying to look at people who were successful and take from them, hey, how did they get to this level from a mindset standpoint? And so I remember looking at, a Michael Jordan or a Kobe Bryant or a Tom Brady, because those are sports, right? That's very easy to make the connection, even though wrestling's not a sport as much as indie wrestlers would like it to be a sport. It's not a sport. But there is a competitive aspect to it and a work aspect to it that is very real. And so I started looking at these athletes and kind of thinking, hey, what can I take from them and put it into wrestling? And then from there, it kind of just flowed naturally into the rest of my life as I got older, right? It's like if I was going to do something, I was going to do it. If I wanted something, I was going to go after it. That's kind of where this mindset came to fruition. So in a lot of ways, without wrestling, I don't know that I would be here.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's funny. It's funny how life puts us on a kind of on a path that we didn't really expect, and then it ends up being pretty great. But is it like, so when you started kind of realizing that you had this mad work ethic and started putting all this effort into your life, was there something, was like, besides athletes, was there other things that you read or looked into on like personal development or like human development that like really caught your eye, or like a book or a person that really like opened up the way you should think and feel and kind of put you on another path?
Well, there's a number. I could go all day on books on personal growth and development, but there is one that really stuck out to me and this is athlete adjacent, is Tim Grover's Relentless. And those who don't know, Tim Grover was Michael Jordan's trainer. He was Kobe Bryant's trainer, and then he was Dwayne Wade's trainer. And now he has a lot of corporate speaking engagements. He writes for Forbes, and his mindset stuff is really what kind of set me on this path. He talks about setting goals and wanting to go after them. I don't want to say it's the secret, right? Because everybody's kind of read that, and that's a little bit of a cliche at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But it is very clear in the book, like, hey, you have to be willing to embrace the dark side. You have to understand that in life, if there's something that you want, you have to go after it. And everyone around you, even people who support you, are going to constantly kind of put these little nuggets into your head of why it's not a good idea or why you shouldn't do it. And part of that is from a place of love, right? They're worried about you being disappointed. But part of that, and a large part of that, is also people project their own insecurities and their own, inability to go
Mm-hmm.
after something onto you, right? Because they can't imagine putting themselves in that position. They can't imagine going to a wrestling school, plunking down thousands of dollars, jumping around in a ring, going to shows, getting paid next to nothing or nothing, and doing this because you're hoping and putting yourself in a position for some light at the end of the tunnel where the odds are so stacked against you.
Mm-hmm.
And so they'll project that onto you in lots of ways, like, oh, do you think this is really a good idea? Or, oh, I could never do that. Or, and you have to recognize that. And now the fun part is, and he says this in his book, is once you start to see the light at the end of the tunnel, once you start to see a little bit of success from all of the work that you've done yourself, all of a sudden your bandwagon starts to get heavier and heavier because people will say, "Oh, I always knew that you were gonna do this." So that's one of the books that really kind of set me on this path. There's another one that I'll recommend. It's by Russ, the rapper, and it's called "Get Out of Your Own Head."
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about manifestation, and he talks about one of my favorite lines in that is where he says, "Trust the what, fuck the when." Can I curse on this? I'm sorry.
Yes,
Um,
I have a couple times already.
all right. So
I mean,
what
we
he
don't do it
says,
all the time, but we do it for emphasis.
well, and that's what's important. That's what's important. If you do it all the time, it loses its emphasis. Anyway, so he says, trust the what, fuck the when. If you know what you're going after and you're passionate about what you're going after, you can't worry about when it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Because the second you start to worry about when it's going to happen or how it's going to happen, you're holding on to it too tight. And the universe kind of knows, like, hey, when you're holding on too tight, you're not ready to receive this yet. So you need to just kind of sit back and let it come to you. Now, that doesn't mean do nothing. You do what you can, you control what you can, but you shouldn't have this feeling of anxiety about it. So those are two of the books that that I really found super helpful. One that I'm reading right now, which I think is, you know what? Let me pause that one. I'll give you that one at the end of the show, maybe.
Okay.
But one more that I recommend for a lot of listeners is called The Four Agreements.
Mm-hmm.
And
I hope we talk about this.
it is phenomenal. Without ruining it, there's four agreements, so to speak, in the book. One of them is don't make assumptions. One of them is related to choosing your words carefully or using your words, and it is applicable to every stage of life. And whether
Mm-hmm.
you are 10 years old or 100 years old or anywhere in between, or you're single or you're married or you're getting divorced or your kids hate you or your kids love, it doesn't matter. I think there are lessons in there that everyone can take away. And it's a fast read. It's, maybe 100 pages, maybe 120 pages. I think it's
100, it's
phenomenal. I've read it.
138 to be exact.
I'm impressed. I'm impressed. I'm glad you know that.
I just finished it actually like 20 minutes before we started this podcast.
Okay, well, so I actually like it so much that I'm at my parents' house in New Jersey right now and not in the city. I actually bought a copy just to keep here to flip through. That's how good it is. So I think those three books will give you a sense of your own personal development, how to go after whatever it is you want in life and be comfortable with the ups and downs that come with it, right? It's never people have this, when they don't think about it, people have this perception of success where they think it kind of looks like a linear acceleration, right? It looks like a graph like this. And the reality is it's messy, right? It's up and down, and then it's down really, really low, and then it's up really high, and then it kind of plateaus a little bit, and then it's down again, then it's up again. And if you read these books, you'll understand that that's all a part of the process, man.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you don't have, I don't want to get, I could keep recommending books all day long, but there's one called No Mud, No Lotus, where he says, you can't have joy without suffering. Because if you don't have suffering, you don't know what joy is. So like
Right.
these are points of reference. So, if you're looking for books that are gonna, whether you want to be a pro wrestler or an actor or a lawyer or a doctor or a salesman or you want to start your own business, whatever it is, these are books that when you read, they will give you a sense of, hey, this is the journey that I'm on. And along this journey, here's what I'm going to experience. Here's how to deal with it. And here's how to go through it in the healthiest way possible that makes me happiest throughout this. Because life is the long game, man. Like life is the long game. It's not the day to day, it's the long game.
Yes, brilliant. So off of what you said, I go back and forth about setting goals, right? Because I have these intentions and these desires and like kind of where like I'm putting my mindset towards like where I want to go with my life and like what do I want to achieve. But life, like you said, is so unpredictable, so that like setting goals almost is kind of silly, because like who knows like what pivots you're going to have to make, what ups and downs is going to happen to get to that end result. So I think like my question would be like, what's your take on setting like exact goals, but also kind of being open to everything and attached to basically nothing?
So you raise a great point, because if we're sitting here, it's July of 2020. If we were sitting here in July of 2019, and you asked me what my goals were, I would tell you what my goals were. And then if you told me, hey, listen, a year from now, for the better part of the first 6 months of the year, you're going to be stuck indoors with no gym, no wrestling. Your job is going to change a little bit. Your school stuff's going to all be online. And a lot of these goals you've set are just not going to be possible to achieve. I would have thought you were insane. Like, there's no way that this is going to happen. Like, what kind of horrible existence are you talking? Here's my thing on goals. I think it's okay to set, one or two big goals. Like, this is my long-term goal. This is where I want to be. Goal may even be the wrong word for it, because to me, you want to set a vision. because a
Hmm.
vision is more pliable than a goal. When people talk about goals, they talk about, what are SMART goals, right? Strategic, time-based, relative. Like there's a whole school of thought on what a goal should be. But I think it's important to have one or two or one kind of vision of where you want your life to be or what you kind of want it to look like, something that you can also manifest. And then you take that and you can break it down into smaller, more achievable goals if you want. Because, the only way you're going to reach the vision that you've put forth is if you're able to accomplish smaller goals along the way, because when
Hmm.
you accomplish a smaller goal, you reinforce that, hey, this vision is possible. This place I want to get to is possible. Um, with that said, especially in the world we are in now, you have to be willing to adapt. You cannot be so stringent in your goals. And that's really, you cannot be so strict in life too, in general, but especially now, because so much is in flux. So if your goal was to wrestle WrestleMania weekend 2020, well, that's not happening because there is no WrestleMania weekend 2020. So how are you going to adapt your goal? If your vision was to be a national professional wrestler, okay, well, my goal of wrestling WrestleMania weekend 2020 didn't happen. What is a small goal that in the world I'm in now I can set and say, this will take me in some small way towards my vision? So I think you're right. You have to be willing to be adaptable and
Hmm.
pliable, if you want to be successful. There is another, I hate to get into the books, but another book called Range, where he talks about, I think it's David Epstein who's written Range, and he talks about how the people who are super successful are not the ones who picked one field and specialized so intensely in that field. It's the people who have a breadth of general experience for a long time and then are able to find their way into their specialized field. Um, in sports, a lot of people will tell you if you want to play a sport at a professional level, when a kid shows talent for that sport, you don't pigeonhole them into that sport. Like we know you're a baseball player. The year-round baseball thing was so detrimental for the long-term health and athletic performance of baseball players.
Hmm.
Uh, we saw this with people who play one sport year-round; they just get worn out. Whereas the greatest athletes are the ones who played 5, 6 different sports and then picked their sport at 16,
Yep.
17. So, I think more now than ever, it's important to be adaptable and understand that just because you can't accomplish a goal now because external factors have changed, it doesn't mean you failed in that. In fact, part of being successful is being able to adapt to where you are in the moment and say, okay, this isn't working. Time to zig a little, time to zag a little. I think adaptability is super, super key right now.
Yes, and failure too. Like failure isn't permanent defeat. It never, unless you make it, unless you allow it to be, it can be permanent defeat. But failure is such an important part, right? Because if you fail, you're like, okay, take a step back. Why did this happen? What caused me to fail? All right, cool. Now I'm gonna make a few tweaks and I'm gonna get back after it. Obviously, that takes a lot of mindset and a lot of attitude to kind of realize that you failed and be like, all right, what should I do? Because obviously it puts us in a bad spot because we failed at something and that's really difficult to do. But it's also really important. I mean, I learned that just through baseball, like, because that's just a failure driven sport. And so like for me in life, it's pretty easy for me to not be good at something and fail at it and be like, all right, well, whatever. I'm used to that. I did it for 17 years in baseball. I only got 3 hits out of 10 and someone told me I was good. So I'm like, all right, let's keep it moving forward.
Well,
Um,
and failure is so important because there is no successful person who has ever not failed,
right.
right? And in order to get to the point of success, you have to go through failures. Like that's just a part of the process. Now, it stings in the moment, it
Hmm.
sucks. You can alleviate that a little bit by knowing going into this and having the confidence and having the mindfulness ahead of time to know, hey, listen, I'm taking a shot at this. I might fail at this. That'll suck. I'll feel bad about it for a little while, but I will then look on it and say, what did I learn from this? What is the takeaway from this? And my next attempt will be more successful. So if you go into it knowing that that's the process, even when you're down in the dumps in the immediacy of a failure, you're still, you know you're going to be successful, right? And that feeling of being a failure or being rejected is temporary. So I think failure is super important. And then there's something to be said for, there are a lot of people who are afraid of failure, who won't even take the leap. They're so scared of failure that they won't even get in the car and drive. And if you're willing to fail, you're already ahead of the game.
Right. This doesn't have to do specifically with failure, but it's in the same general theme of like, you have to risk heartbreak for love.
It's 100% right. There's, you can, if you want, you can close yourself off and never have heartbreak. Or if you want love, you have to risk it. You have to be vulnerable. And we could do a whole hour on, personally, I think vulnerability is power. Like there's something powerful. There's something powerful about saying, you know what, I may get hurt by this, but the risk of attaining love is worth it. So I'm going to put myself out there. And if I do get hurt or do get devastated by this, it's going to suck, but I know that I will be able to claw myself back up. I will be able to pick myself back up. Like, to me, there's just something so empowering about vulnerability.
Yeah, it's very beautiful. I love it. I mean, but that also goes to show that like we have to teach people, and people need to learn emotional resilience. Because if we're not teaching emotional resilience or emotional agility or mental wellness, then how do we deal with failure, heartbreak, rejection, harsh criticism? And these things aren't like necessarily taught in school, and they're not necessarily taught in sports either. So we have to make it an emphasis to be able to teach young people how to understand what they're feeling, how to understand heartbreak, and how to have emotional resilience to get through the tough times to lead them down to the better times.
You're right. They don't teach this in schools, right? And it's so important. And for most people, I'm generalizing maybe a little bit, but most people probably don't go down the path of learning about these things until, their first big failure in life, or the first big, heartbreak in life. That's what kind of, cracks open the door to learning these things. And, I do wonder, if we taught this in schools, or maybe, if there was a freshman seminar at every college on, emotional intelligence, and self-development, what that would look like.
Yeah.
And I think that would be super valuable. I'm sure there are places that do emotional intelligence. I know in business schools and there are, but I think it's something that benefits everyone. And if everybody gets it and knows it and is aware of it, like the whole world becomes a better place then.
Yeah. Because I mean, being a human being is a tough spot. It's very complex, It's hard to navigate. Like on one end, it's so amazing that we got born. It's so amazing that we're alive and we're born, because that's super rare in itself. You actually look into the numbers of like being born and being alive. It's like super rare and it's fucking incredible. But then once you are in the world, it's very complex and there's a lot of things to navigate and it's really hard. And so if we can understand a little bit about how we feel, just like slowly kind of learn some emotional resilience and this mental wellness, and how to, like, because we're taught at an early age, you need to brush your teeth every day, you need to shower every day. Like, why are we not teaching the same things in terms of like, okay, I had a bad day, what should I do about it? What are my self-care tips? How do I do a coping technique? Do I need to go for a walk? Should I write these things down? Like, what ways work best for you? And if you're doing that for like the first 15, 16 years of your like, teenage adult life, then once you get to like the really hard stuff, it depends on how, where you grew up in your environment and how much stuff you go through, but, you could be dealing with family member loss, or, not getting into the college you want, or not getting the job you want, or being rejected by a friend or a family member, or, being dumped, your first relationship, like all these things you're going to go through. They're normal things, but, it takes emotional resilience to get through them and be better because of it. But, we could talk about this all day probably.
we could. I would love to. Yeah, it's something that needs to be covered, and luckily there is a movement towards kind of mental health, mindfulness, and wellness. I
Yeah.
don't like using those three interchangeably because I think there is, there's mental health and then there's kind of the mindfulness, wellness kind of thing, right? Like
Yeah.
there's one part of it that, somebody who's medically trained or professionally trained to kind of help you confront, should be, that's the path to go down. And then there's, mindfulness and wellness and emotional intelligence. And so in, on that side of things, I think we definitely need to do a better job educating youth. I am encouraged by the fact that there is kind of this movement and global embrace of wellness and mental well-being on a much, much larger scale than there was even 5 years ago. That meditation apps are prevalent now, that mindfulness magazines and mindfulness coaching and podcasts are so much more prevalent now than they were 5 years ago. So that's super encouraging, at least for me.
Yeah, I mean, even, I started the You Are Loved thing like basically in May of 2019. And even now, just a year later, like the amount of people speaking about mental health or wanting to talk about their mental health or just like organizations being created and stuff is like far more greater than it was. I think a lot has to do with COVID-19 because it really put an emphasis on that there's a mental health crisis in our country, because people who had never felt depressed before or anxiety before were feeling it during COVID-19. And there was very limited resources, especially in communities of like lower income or minority communities. There's way less access. And if there's less access, there's going to be, if you have less access to something, there's obviously going to be less people asking for it because they don't know how to get to it because there's nothing there. Like, why would I ask for something that I know is not available? But if it's available and accessible and easy to get to, then more people are going to ask for it because they feel comfortable with it. They know that their friends and their peers have already gone there to ask for help. It's helped them. So now I feel comfortable doing the same. But that's, a healthcare topic, and getting that getting that accessible and available for everyone and affordable for everyone. Something I can't really do by just talking about it, but talking about it helps. So maybe someone important will hear it and there'll be some reforms made, but it is what it is.
Hey, fingers crossed, man. Make sure you register to vote and vote in November, especially you who live in Texas.
That's right. Oh yeah.
I will say, on the topic you just mentioned, Scott Galloway is a professor at NYU, and he's a writer and he's on podcasts and stuff, and he calls COVID an accelerant. So what it's done is it's accelerated a lot of trends in business and culture, probably 10 years faster than they otherwise would have accelerated. So I think and he's talked about this in terms of automation and, people ordering stuff instead of going to retail, but also in terms of mindfulness and wellness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that longing for this as a topic of conversation and culture has definitely accelerated since COVID started, because like you said, people are in their homes and you don't have anything to do. Like, what do? You start thinking all day. And so people are able to kind of confront their childhood traumas, even unwillingly, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And this need for a conversation around mindfulness and wellness has accelerated. And so it's kind of, I don't want to say it's blowing up, but it kind of is blowing up. Kevin Hart wrote an Audible audiobook called The Decision, which is kind of a wellness, mindfulness, and self-help kind of Audible book. And that's, imagine 2 years ago, if I told you, hey, 2 years from now, Kevin Hart is going to write an Audible originals audiobook about mental health and wellness and mindfulness, you would be like, what, the annoying guy from those movies is going to write this book? But he did, and it's great.
Yeah.
It's actually really well done because that's what people want to consume right now. So
right.
I think that's accelerated is one of the benefits. I don't want to say benefit, but it's one of the good things to come from this COVID.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I know COVID is terrible. Like people are dying, right? They're losing their jobs, their finances. Like there's isolation, like mad bad stuff, like totally
Totally.
bad, right? But with everything that we talk about, especially in this last hour that we've talked, if we got to look on the bright side of things, right? And so that is
You
a
have
bright
to
side.
find,
That is a bright
you
side of
have,
COVID-19. Like so, I think people are a little bit more grateful for the small things in their life, like the things that were taken away from them immediately. Now they just have, what they have, and they're very grateful for that. And I'm grateful for the same stuff. And then, we're thinking about our mental health and how do we be more mindful and how do we be more appreciative and open and empathetic. And, these things take a long time to do. Like I'm just scratching the surface of all this stuff, right? But I feel like I have a good grasp on it, but I'm still just scratching the surface. And now other people around the world are kind of learning the same things. So we can grow together. But that's a good thing that came out of COVID-19. And you have to kind of find the light in the darkness for sure.
you have to find the silver linings. Um, because, and that's not to minimize, bad stuff that's happening.
Right.
It's just, if you don't find the silver linings, all you're focused on is the dark, and that stuff will consume you, right?
Hmm.
So you have to kind of find the silver linings. Like there's, people will say, be present. And me, when the world is normal, I'm running around like a madman, right? It's like gym, work, wrestling, grad school, this event, that event. Like it's just like nonstop sometimes.
Yeah.
And, the one silver lining is this is the first time where I literally will go outside and go for a walk without headphones and just kind of like look and be like, damn, like this is really nice to just
Yeah.
be in a moment for a second. And there are all kinds of studies done that show you that that is beneficial to your mental health. Like when you do that, your breathing changes, your nervous system activates the right type of response, and your brain releases more dopamine, which makes you feel good.
Hmm.
So it's definitely, if saying that I'm looking at the silver linings or I'm looking at the glass half full, anyone who looks at things that way, to them, I would say, you shouldn't feel guilty about that. You
No.
shouldn't feel bad about that. You could acknowledge the darkness while still looking at the light. You put it perfectly. I couldn't put it better.
Yeah, I mean that's basically like I talk about having positive attitude or being optimistic. That's basically the definition of optimism or positivity. Like if I'm eating a sandwich and I think the sandwich tastes like shit, I don't have to lie about the sandwich being not shitty. Like that's not positive. That's just like being fake. That's toxic positivity. That's fake happiness. Like, oh, this sandwich tastes like shit. It does. It sucks. But if I order another sandwich, this one will taste good or has the possibility to taste good. And now, boom, I'm optimistic about the future. That's the idea. Not like, oh, everything's great, everything's grand. No, some things are absolute shit.
Some things are bad. Yeah, no,
And they're
that's totally
allowed to be
fine.
that way. Like I've gone through the last 2 years of my life. Some days are I mean, I've gone through some of the worst shit that I'll ever go through in my life. But we can come out on the other side of it. We can. It's possible. And that's exactly what can happen right now with COVID-19 and the Black Lives Matter. Like what's happening right now is necessary, but we can come out and be better for it and be better because of it and all these things. So like that's what optimism means. I feel like you feel the same way. But you can expand on that if you'd like.
I think I would just say, if there was one line to sum up my view of optimism, it's just think of the possibilities, because our brains are wired in such a way that, and this is evolution and this is survival, where when it comes to what you're feeling in the moment and even the possibilities, you always focus on the negative, right? Because, back in the day, the negative is what you needed to avoid, because if you didn't avoid it, the negative would kill you, right? Now a lot of us are blessed to live in a time where that's not true, right? But we are still it's still ingrained in us to err on the side of negativity. So, just to give an example, I was talking to a friend of mine who just had his girlfriend break up with him, or she ghosted him, or whatever. It didn't work out. And he couldn't figure out why. And oh my God, I'm never going to find somebody. I'm never going to love somebody. Like, I'll never find anybody as pretty. I'll never find anybody as this or that. And I was like, dude, right now, You're in pain. That's fine. Feel that way. But eventually you need to realize, like, think of the possibilities, right? Like this one person, it sucks. It's miserable. We've all been there. There's 7 billion people on the planet. 7 billion. You don't think that there is one person who will find one other person who will find your presence tolerable and your appearance inoffensive. Like, come on, come
Yeah.
fucking on. So I say that example just to reiterate, you have to always think of the possibilities. I said this when I was recording my first episode of my show. Don't just think about what can go wrong. Think about all the ways that it can go right.
Yes.
Because when
Brilliant.
you do that, you will feel better. You will manifest the outcome. And when you feel better and are manifesting that, you're more likely to do the work that is going to put you in a position to obtain one of those possibilities, right? As opposed to being down in the dumps and feeling sad and feeling upset and kind of, circling in this vicious circle of sadness. So, one takeaway: think of the possibilities. Don't think about what can go wrong. Think about all the ways that it can go right.
I love that. Think of the possibilities. Beautiful. All right, so we got one more topic to discuss before we talk about your upcoming podcast and then have some closing thoughts. But so I've been diving into the concept of ego a little bit because it's very interesting. So I want to know what you feel like is the difference between ego slash arrogance slash self-confidence. Like what the difference between ego and self-confidence is. Like what your take is.
So this is one of my favorite things because, especially in the world of independent wrestling, right?
Yes,
Like
yes,
there's
yes.
this fine line between confidence and arrogance, and people will go, "Oh, that Mick, I don't like him. He's kind of an arrogant douche, or he thinks he's better than everybody." So here's the thing: confidence to me is knowing what you know and then knowing what you don't know. It's having done preparation and done the work to succeed at something and feeling good about the end result being likely to occur. So a great example is you have a chemistry test coming up. You studied really, really hard for the chemistry test. You've done a bunch of practice tests for it. You killed the practice test. You got like 9 out of 10 in all the practice tests. The day you walk into that room to take that chemistry exam, you're feeling like $1,000,000. You feel strong. You're ready to go. The paper gets set down on your desk. You look at the questions and you're like, I fucking got this. To me, that's confidence.
Yep, for sure.
Arrogance is not having done the prep work and thinking you're going to get this outcome. Arrogance is going to a place, failing, and then not being willing to evaluate that failure, learn from it, because you're too stubborn to admit that you were wrong or admit that you didn't do the work, and you're too stubborn to hold yourself accountable. Real, true confidence comes from accountability. And I'm not talking about, douche bro, egotistical confidence, right? Like that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about having done the work, having done
Real
the
confidence.
preparation.
Yeah.
Yes, it's the kind of confidence that when it's real, it comes from within. You cannot fake it. You cannot act confident. You just are. And the people who are the most confident in that space give 2 fucks about what other people think about whether they appear to be confident or not, because they know themselves and they know that they are where they're supposed to be. So to me, that's the difference between confidence and arrogance.
Spot on. It's brilliant.
Don't keep it coming. My head's gonna blow up.
Yeah, I always bring it like when this comes up, I always bring it back to like super elite professional athletes because from a fan's perspective, right, there's someone who's never played at that level, right? And that's no knock on them. That's just they never got to that level because it's extremely hard. Very rare amount of people get to the elite level status of being a professional athlete. And so when you see them on TV or you see them on the internet or you see them post game, it a bit looks like they have a bit of arrogance or ego to them, like someone like LeBron James. But for him, that's just his natural aura of self-confidence. Like, because he wakes up every single day knowing that he's the best basketball player in the world today. And he's done the work. He's put in the hours. And so he knows that. And so there's a fine line between, in that regard, between like arrogance, because you have to have a little bit when you're surrounded by other elite athletes in a field like that, to know that your shit doesn't stink, you're better than everyone else, but you also put in the real work in the gym, in the weight room, with your mindfulness, with visualization, all these things. So that fine balance is hard, because some fans will just be like, why don't you like LeBron? He's arrogant. Well, I mean, maybe he is, but also it's warranted because of who he is and like what he's done. But in terms of like, everyday life, people like that, what you said is spot on.
And I think with LeBron and with these pro athletes, that's a great example, because even in their worlds, and even in just the office world, right, results matter. And you're confident when you have done the work and have proven time after time that you can show results. So if we went back to 1995 or 1996 and we interviewed Michael Jordan and we said, hey, Michael, are you the best basketball player on the planet? And the cameras were rolling. He would probably laugh and, say something charming, because that's Michael. He would go, I don't want to get into this, who's the best or who's not the best. Or, I think I'm really prepared and focused on winning this game. And, we need to execute our game plan, and we need to make sure that we do what it takes to win, because we're playing a very good basketball team, right? That's what he would say. Now turn the cameras off. Take everybody out of the room. And it's just you and Mike. And you're under lock and key, and you're never going to be able to repeat what he says, because he hands you $20 million and says, if you repeat this again, I will take this and every cent you'll ever own for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And you ask him, Michael, are you the best basketball player on the planet? He's going to look you dead in the eyes and say, you better fucking believe I am. Because he's done the work. And the thing is, if he doesn't believe it, nobody else will.
Right.
That's something that people can sense. So for the people who are listening, if you don't believe that you can do something, if you don't believe that you're deserving of something, if you don't believe that you can accomplish something, nobody else will. And people will sense that insecurity and sense that lack of confidence. And they're like sharks that smell blood, just subconsciously. So you got to believe.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think another thing with like pro athletes is like, we obviously don't know them as people. Like, we obviously don't live with them at home. We're not hanging out with them. We're not chilling on the boat with them, when they're away from the game with their family. Like, and from what I see on social media, LeBron seems like just like a cool, level-headed dude. Like, I'm a huge fan of LeBron. So like, I think he's amazing. And so,
he is amazing.
But like, it's the same with like a pro wrestler, like who we are in the ring and how confident and competitive I am in the ring, because that's who I am as a person. Like, I'm competitive and I want to win, regardless if the outcome is fixed or not. I want to do the absolute best I can, because I'm a competitive person. I want to be the best fucking independent professional wrestler on the planet. But when you just hang out with me outside of the show, or like we're just gonna get a beer or something, it's cool. We're chilling. I'm just like, I'm this level-headed guy. Sometimes I get fired up because, certain topics fire me up, but it is what it is. But I think that's the vibe right there. But yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think you're right. I
had something else. What was I going to say? I feel like I missed it. Okay. Let's talk about your podcast that you're going to come out with soon.
So this is something
called? What inspired it?
So right now it's titled Self-Awareness Bruh. BRUH. I had to come up with a good name, and I wasn't sure what to come up with, and I was like, hey, this plays. Part of this was the COVID thing, right? Because I have a lot of energy, a lot of creative energy, and wrestling basically got put on hold. And I was like, all right, well, I can't do that. I was gonna be doing this modeling thing, and that kind of got put on hold too.
Yep.
And so I went, all right, so what can I do now? What can I actively do right now? You kind of know me a little bit to know that I do have this passion for kind of self-awareness and
Mm-hmm.
self-development and, living your, not to sound like a cliche, but like hashtag living your best life, but actually doing it, right? Not
Right.
like just posting the pretty pictures.
Yeah,
And so I
not
thought,
doing
well,
the
what can I
combo.
do? Right, exactly. And so I was like, well, what can I do? And where do I fit? And, there are some great, self-development, self-love podcasts out there that exist right now at very high levels. Like there's Jay Shetty, there's a bunch of them. But the thing is, first of all, a lot of them are geared towards women, which is great because that's a population that definitely needs, is looking for that and, connects with that. And that's great. But there isn't necessarily one that connects to the more masculine energy that's out there, right? Like
The
there are a
dude.
lot of people who, right, the dudes, the dude bros. There are people, and they're some of the people who need to hear this more than anyone else.
For sure. Yeah, we just
But
talked about that earlier. Yeah.
but they kind of see Jay Shetty or they see like some hipster looking dude giving them this info and they're like, why am I going to listen to this guy? Well, sometimes it's the messenger and not the message. So I'm like,
Mm.
6'3",
Mm.
240, muscles. Maybe I'm the guy to do this. So I started kind of laying out some topics and I put together a show where every, show is going to be a topic. So confidence, failure, rejection, the suck, there's a whole list of topics. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a pep talk. And then I'm going to give you a tangible exercise that you can do. And it's got to be something you write down. So you get out your pen, you get out your paper, and you go through this exercise. And then I've got an interview. So yeah, there you go. See, you can't see it, listeners, but he's holding up his pen and pad. And then there's a segment where I'll be interviewing someone from my life, be they a wrestler, an attorney, somebody I've met through the brand development world at Columbia, somebody I've grown up with or worked with, where their story kind of connects that topic and the lessons in that topic. And so you can see how this kind of plays out in just day-to-day life or among elite athletes or among lawyers or whoever you want. So I think it's something that's very unique. I was trying to find, the thing with podcasting, this is there's so many podcasts out there right now. And if you want to be successful, you need to kind of find your niche. You need to find
Mm-hmm.
where you fit. And so I think, the dude bros who need someone to listen to, who need to hear these things about emotions and self-improvement and self-awareness to be, better boyfriends and be better employees and better brothers and better fathers as they get older. I think that's where I fit. So that's kind of what I'm putting together. I will say this had started as a podcast initially, but I don't know that that's where it's going to end up. I've recorded a few episodes. I haven't gone live yet. We're planning to go live a month from now, but it may end up being an Audible Originals, scripted kind of audiobook instead. We'll see. We'll see what ends up happening. But I think it's something that, if it does launch, I think a lot of people who listen to your show and find it useful, those dude bros will find this show valuable too.
Yeah. First of all, love it. Definitely going to listen. Would like to be on it. Anyway,
You can be on it. You can be on it.
but I think the most important thing you said was it may not be the message, but it may be the messenger. And I think that is incredibly powerful for men, because like Russell Brand has a podcast, right? We know Russell Brand. He's a huge comedian, actor, whatever, and then he became a drug addict. Then he became a drug addict, and then he went through the 12 steps of recovery, and now he's like on this spiritual awakening journey. And his podcast is brilliant. But if you're not into like someone who's spiritual, kind of a hippie, like I vibe with it because I'm much more spiritual than I used to be, and which is cool. Also religious at the same time, believe in something. But he looks different, right? He's wearing like robes. He's got long necklaces. He's kind of just chilling all the time. And for someone maybe who like, who's similar to yourself, who goes to the gym all the time, who works in a I don't know. I don't know if being a lawyer
We'll
is a field.
call them finance bros, the finance
Yeah,
bros, right?
but
That's who we're
they're
looking
not
at.
they're not going to fuck with someone like that. They're not on the same vibe. They're on the same wavelength. So even if Russell is saying stuff that's powerful and they connect with, it might not really resonate as deeply as with someone who looks similar to them or is on the same wave as them, just like yourself. Someone 6'4", 250 pounds is a dude, bro, but also is connecting with his inner side and unpacking and unraveling the things that are going on internally. So I think that what you said is brilliant.
I think there's something there, Jax. I really do. That's why I'm so passionate about it. That's why I'm outlining episode after episode after episode. We're recording them in the tank. We've got ad breaks. It's a whole thing. I want it to be good. That's my other thing. We talked about this work ethic at the beginning of the show. If I'm going to do this, it's going to be good.
Yeah.
And if it's not good, I'm not going to want to do it. If it's not something that I can, turn around and sell to Spotify or an Audible or a Vox Media or one of these content companies that are all looking for podcast content, because the reality is, right now everything's frozen. There are no new TV shows coming out. The only content that can be really created right now is podcast content.
Yeah.
So, a lot of these tech companies and a lot of these media companies are looking for podcast content. So if this is not something that's high enough quality that I can sell to them, I don't want to do it, because then it's not high enough quality for listeners either.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I started originally this show, Jaxon Talks Everybody, was just a YouTube platform. I was just going to record and put it on YouTube. Then it turned into me putting it on Apple and Spotify. But I like having the visual YouTube content, because people want to look at something too when they digest this content. So I think being able to put it on a bunch of different platforms is cool. But also,
fun fact, let me interrupt you real quick, just a detour. I think that Spotify has started with a lot of their original content. If you open the app and stream a podcast, if you keep the screen on, you'll see the audio or the video of the people talking in their studio now, instead of just seeing the podcast logo. So there is a pivot to kind of, even though we're a podcast audio content company, we want to also have this video content component in a time when there is no new video content coming out. So you're ahead of the game by continuing to kind of have this video component.
It's the same thing. I noticed that with music. Like if there's a music video related to the song, it's playing in the background of and I was like, oh, that's super dope. I love this. I like caught myself just like watching the Spotify screen on my phone, but just music's playing. It's like the whole music. It was cool. But in terms of you starting your podcast and you want it to be like super good right away, like in having the best quality audio and things like that, I'm more on the side of like, if I have an idea, I'm just going to start it and I'm just going to do it. I don't really, because I've looked back at like my old episodes or some of my old videos, and obviously the quality is shit. I didn't have any microphones. There was no logo, like nothing. But I'm big into like seeing the kind of the progression of how the episodes and the way it worked evolved. So if I have an idea, like I'm just gonna like start it, and I don't feel bad if it's like super whack at the beginning, because I'm like, the experience is like feeding my soul and allowing me to like work out the kinks and make it better. But I want people to see those kinks, and I want people to see me working that stuff out in real time, so that the things I talk about in terms of like working through the hard stuff is like, it's seen and heard through my actions, and not just like, all right, he started this podcast because he had all the tools and resources, and now he has got a million. Like when famous people start podcasts, of course you have a million views already, bro. You're already famous. Like whatever. What's up? I'm out here grinding. I'm grinding for views, but I wanted to have that vibe and that feel with this show at least. And I had to delete a bunch of episodes because a lot of people on the previous episodes were associated with speaking out, and I didn't want to be a part of that anymore. I wanted to start fresh and really try to make a change with this podcast. And I think the last few episodes have been better. I'm kind of happy with the way it's going now. So like we've been talking about, you got to make those pivots and got to be open to whatever kind of life throws at you.
Well, you hit the nail on the head too. And I'm sure you know this, is you have to take action, right? Like it's very easy to get caught up in this, like, oh, well, here's what I need to do before I start. here's what I need to do before I can take the first step. And a lot of times it's like, you know what? Don't worry about all the things you have to do. Don't worry about making the lists. Just fucking take the first step, right? Just take the first step, because most people never take that first actionable step. They talk about it, they think about it, they plan for it, but they never actually do it.
Yep.
So I think you're to be commended for saying, you know what, I'm just going to do it. For me, I made the commitment of buying a microphone and getting this equipment and getting some of the audio editing software, because I said to myself, you know what, if I spend this money on this, now I'm going to have to do it. So that's my action. Even if I haven't
Right.
put it out there yet, my action is spending all this money on this stuff, outlining it, putting it together. But if you don't take that first step, you'll never, like, you can't run if you don't take the first step to start walking.
Right. Yeah. I always say you can't fly if you don't jump.
100%.
So, do you have an idea of when you might drop the episode, or it's still in kind of in limbo?
Well, I tell you what. So, unfortunately for the listeners here, what I will do is I will send you one or two of the episodes that I've got in the tank, and you can listen to it, and then you can tell people about it if you want. But
Yeah.
for the general public, what are we, mid-July now? It's
Yeah.
probably going to be mid-August before it comes out, because
Okay.
there's one big thing I want to do, and there's one big guest that I'm trying to get, who I'm trying to make sure that he's free. But things are a little crazy down in Orlando for him right now. But
Understood.
we'll see.
Understood. Yeah. Today's July 16th. This episode will probably drop in 2 weeks for me, because I'm trying to film every Thursday a week in advance from when I drop the episodes on Tuesday.
Cool.
But before we go, I want to ask you about one thing. Just give me your quick thoughts on Richard Holiday.
Well, so let me give you some thoughts on two people. First,
Okay.
let me talk about Richard Holiday.
Yes.
Unfiltered, I think Richard Holiday is a good professional wrestler. You know me, my standards for that are pretty high.
For sure.
I think Holiday's a good pro wrestler who gets it. Sadly, he's not as athletic as me. He's not as strong or explosive. He's not as smooth. He's a great talker. I enjoy hearing him talk. Anytime I've wrestled him, I've enjoyed it. And I think that, honestly, all joking aside, I think he has so much potential as an in-ring talent. The second person I want to talk about is my buddy Joe. Joe is a great guy, very self-aware, very open, very clear in his goals, cares about his family, cares about his friends. And I'm glad that Joey is one of my closest friends right now.
Yeah, man, that's something I really admire about him, man. He's taking care of his family, and that's like his number one priority. Like, he just puts in so much effort and so much work. And
he's a great dude. That's all.
Yeah,
he's a great dude, like Richard, an actual great dude. There's so many people in wrestling who are like, oh, he's a good guy, or this guy's a good guy, and I hate to sound cliche, but like, for the large majority of them, that's not the case.
Yeah.
But he is just genuinely a good dude and a good human being.
Yeah, I've never wrestled him one-on-one, but we've teamed together twice as Lights Camera Marketing, which is an incredible tag team that is no longer.
I know. I was so disappointed when I first saw that. I saw that years ago. I think it was in that Rhode Island place. Yeah. And I was like, oh, that's brilliant. I love that. And like, that's a great name. You guys have a great look together. I was like, I can't wait till they kind of start doing this more. And Devin and I were tagging at the time, and I was like, oh, that's a great matchup, like the industry versus Lights Camera Marketing. And then it was gone.
Yeah, because I dropped Lights Camera Jackson because that whole thing was not my vibe anymore. And
you can tell the truth. It's because you got a haircut.
Yes, that's exactly why. No long hair, no Lights Camera Jackson. This is just a regular old dude with short hair. But he's by far my favorite part of MLW. I don't watch the product regularly because I won't talk about that here. But I do watch what Richard does and what Jordan Oliver does. I think Hammerstone's dope too.
Alex. I was going to say Alex is my guy. He's another great guy. I've wrestled him a bunch of times, and we I would love to wrestle him again once this kind of calms down.
Yeah,
Because he's just one of the guys that you just have chemistry sometimes with
sure.
somebody, and it was one of those things where we would just call something on the fly, and it would be us calling the same exact thing in the same exact moment.
Beautiful. Love that.
He would kind of be like, reverse, duck this, blah blah blah, and I would be like, reverse. Oh, okay, yeah, same thing. All right, cool. Like,
And then you're hitting that mad drop kick or that German or what?
bro, that's what I come on. You got to brand it. You got to brand it. It's the drop kick, and then the German is called the deep cut. We got to brand it.
No,
Everything is by
yes.
a branded name.
Don't worry, I know everything about my brand. It has to do with everybody. So
we're at I'll be at indie shows and people will be like, yeah, I'm gonna do this, blah blah blah, and then Mick, can you take this, blah blah blah, and they'll write off some like crazy name on something, and they're like, oh, I'm like, what is that? I've never heard of that. And they're like, oh, it's like a Uranagi times spinning bottom. I'm like, dude, just say rock bottom. Like, just say rock bottom. You don't have to tell me the crazy Japanese Mexican name for it. Like, just tell me you want me to take a rock bottom or a stunner or a diamond cutter or RKO, or like, just use the WWE name for Christ's sake.
yeah, I don't care what you tell announcers or commentators. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Just tell me. So.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Yeah, man. We talked for it's an hour and 30 minutes right here.
It's easy, man. I told you, I could talk all day long, but especially about myself.
I love it. It was good. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate you doing this.
Dude, of course. Thank you. I was so happy to be here, man. Like, and I'm so happy to see all the stuff that you're doing. Like, it's so motivating to me too,
Oh, thank you. I'm just happy to see your face. It's still pretty.
Well, that's not going to change. I promise you that. I have been comfortable without the beard for a while though now.
It looks good, dude. It's fresh. It looks really good.
I look in the mirror and I'm like, who is this? You forget what you look like without a beard when you shave it for the first time.
Yeah, no, totally.
So I was just like looking in the mirror and I was like, oh, that's what I look like. Okay.
You got like some cheekbones, some jaw structure, man. It's got to look good.
I know. I look 10 years younger, right?
I mean, I don't think you looked old before.
We're all getting there. Don't worry. We're all getting there.
Only better with age, my friend.
That's how I look at it. All right. Well, listen, thank you so much. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep me posted if you need anything from here. And I will text you actually if you want to listen to one or two of the episodes that I've done and let me know what you think. I'll send it to you and then just listen to it whenever you're free and let me know what you think.
Yes, please.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate it, buddy.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.